A spoiled teenager decides to humiliate a grocery store employee in front of everyone. But what he didn't know is that a man was silently watching. A man who didn't need to raise his voice to change everything. His name? Jason Statham. What seemed like just another ordinary day turned into a lesson neither of them would forget. And what happened in the next few minutes went viral around the world. Not because of screams, but because of respect. The clock marked late afternoon when the automatic doors of the small neighborhood grocery store opened. The golden sunlight passed through the glass and drew reflections on the worn-out white tiles of the floor. It was an ordinary Tuesday. Shopping carts squeaked down the aisles, mothers called out to impatient children. Bags of rice and boxes of milk filled the scene of a simple, almost invisible routine. But there was something about that day, an imperceptible detail, a quiet vibration, that was about to change everything. Behind one of the registers, Miriam, a woman just over 50, adjusted her uniform vest while organizing change with care. She had kind eyes, careful movements, and a gentle voice that made even the most impatient customers breathe a little slower. For her, that job was more than a source of income. It was the last thread connecting her to dignity after difficult years. Every good morning she gave was a silent attempt to keep the world in balance. As she rang up the groceries for an elderly woman, the sound of the automatic doors repeated. A teenager, wearing a blue cap, dressed in designer clothes and expensive headphones, entered chewing gum with his mouth open. His steps were heavy, not from weight, but from the intention of being noticed. He wasn't walking, he was performing. Without paying attention to anyone around him, he went straight to the back of the store. He grabbed 2 sodas, a box of imported chocolates, and a bag of chips. He returned with crossed arms and a bored expression. He tossed the items onto Miriam's counter like they were garbage. He didn't take off his headphones, he didn't even look her in the eyes. She smiled, as she always did, and began the checkout process with the same politeness. But he waved his hand, rushing her as if to say, "Hurry up." The line behind began to grow. A small child looked at the scene, not understanding the tension. The boy, Liam, as his school bracelet revealed, removed one of his headphones, looked down at Miriam, and muttered a low, mocking comment. Her smile faltered. He then mimicked her tone of voice in a mocking way, making the 2 friends in the back laugh. One of them, with a phone in hand, was discreetly recording. Miriam, flushed with embarrassment, lowered her eyes to hide the expression forming on her face. Her fingers trembled slightly as she scanned the items. But she didn't respond. She continued, trying not to shake. At the back of the store, near the fresh produce and bakery section, a man stood silently observing. He wore a black t-shirt, dark jeans, and pushed an almost empty cart, just a bottle of water and a pack of pasta. His posture was calm, his face steady. It was Jason Statham. But no one had noticed him yet. He wasn't there as a star, but as an ordinary man. And yet it was impossible not to feel his presence when he chose to remain still. He wasn't part of that scene. He stood at the edge of it, like a judge watching an unfair match about to get out of control. Liam spoke again. His tone grew louder as the security of the group increased. His friend's phone kept recording. They laughed, they mocked. A woman nearby looked on with disapproval, but said nothing. Miriam heard it all, but did not react. Until the moment Liam picked up one of the sodas and waved it in front of her, asking, with his eyes and tone, if she even knew what brand it was. A dry laugh sliced the air. That's when Jason moved his cart for the first time. The sound of the wheels on the floor broke the harmony of the mockery. He approached slowly, unhurried, but with a precision that felt almost surgical. He stopped beside Liam. He said nothing. He simply observed. Liam turned his head, surprised. For a moment his eyes met Jason's. But what he saw wasn't an angry man. It wasn't a confrontational adult. It was something deeper. A heavy silence that seemed to hold up mirrors to his behavior. And Liam wasn't ready to see himself reflected in that. Miriam looked up and saw the man standing beside her. She recognized him. But she didn't smile. There was something stronger than surprise in her eyes. Relief. Jason placed his few items on the counter calmly. He didn't look away, and for a moment Liam seemed like he wanted to say something, but he didn't, because the words that were once his weapons now felt useless. The laughter stopped. Liam's friends lowered their phones. The line behind, once distracted, now paid full attention. Jason kept his hands on the cart. His eyes didn't shout. They simply exposed. Liam looked away. He glanced at Miriam, then at the phone, then down at the floor. For the first time, he didn't know what to do, or how to leave the scene. And then Miriam handed him the bag with the items already paid for. Her hand was steady. The gesture was simple, but full of meaning, as if to say, "Here's your choice, and what you do with it is up to you." Jason didn't move. Not yet. Liam grabbed the bag, hesitated, took half a step back. But the weight of the room was different now. He was no longer the one in control, and everyone felt it. The teenager laughed, satisfied to be the center of attention. But he didn't hear the sound of a shopping cart stopping beside him. Jason Statham had stepped closer, and his stare left no doubt. Something was about to change. Time seemed to slow down. Jason Statham's presence, silent and solid beside the checkout counter, radiated an energy that no one there could explain, only feel. There were no words, no aggressive gestures. But the environment shifted, as if someone had turned off the market's soundtrack and left only the raw sound of reality. Liam was still holding the shopping bag, but now with tense fingers. The jokes evaporated. His friends stopped filming and for the first time realized that something about their behavior had crossed an invisible line. Jason wasn't looking directly at Liam, but he wasn't ignoring him either. His eyes were fixed on the items on the counter, as if measuring the value of something beyond groceries, perhaps the weight of respect or shame. He slowly turned the bottle of water on the counter, his fingers calm, precise. His silence was more eloquent than any reprimand. Miriam on the other side adjusted her shoulders, took a deeper breath. Her posture shifted slightly. It wasn't relief, nor victory. It was restored dignity. And she knew who had triggered the change. Jason passed his items slowly, paid with a folded bill, unhurried. He thanked her with a slight nod, barely noticeable, but Miriam understood. It wasn't gratitude for the change. It was for enduring, for not retaliating, for standing tall. He then picked up his bag, took one step to the side, and stayed there, quiet, as if waiting for something. Liam noticed he wasn't leaving. The discomfort grew. There were no more smiles, no more cameras, only the distant sound of items being scanned at the other checkouts and the tension suspended in the air. The line behind Liam no longer moved, but no one complained. Everyone seemed trapped in that bubble of anticipation. What would happen next? Jason, unmoving, slowly looked toward the exit, then back to the counter, as if to say without saying, "I'm here because this is where I need to be." Liam, by instinct, adjusted his cap. He tried to recover his posture, but something inside him was beginning to crumble. The looks from others, once filled with amusement or admiration, now carried judgment, and he felt each one like a thorn against his skin. Miriam, even as she resumed helping customers, noticed something had changed in Liam. The way he held the bag, how his shoulders were less broad now, how his eyes searched for an exit that didn't involve running. Jason took a step forward. It wasn't a threat. It was presence. Liam turned his face as if trying to avoid confronting what he had done. But it was too late. That moment couldn't be ignored anymore. The silence around him was louder than any word. An elderly woman in line whispered something to her daughter, who nodded. A father pulled his son closer. Everyone understood, even without knowing the details, that this scene was more than just a market moment. It was a social mirror, a public lesson in respect. Jason walked slowly toward the exit, bag in hand, never looking back. His body radiated balance, not urgency. He had said everything without opening his mouth, and still, everyone heard it. Liam watched that man walk away with steady steps, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something he wasn't used to handling. Respect. Not the kind that is forced through shouting, but the kind that arises when someone demonstrates a rare type of strength, the silent kind. Miriam continued her work, now with a serene expression. Her eyes still sparkled, but not with sadness, with relief. Liam walked toward the exit. His friends followed silently. No filming, no jokes. One of them even put his phone back into his pocket without unlocking it. Outside, the sky was starting to change. Clouds were forming, and the wind carried the promise of light rain. Jason was already across the street, calmly getting into his discreet black car. It wasn't a supercar, nor did it draw attention. But like everything about him, there was purpose in every detail. Liam looked once more at the store, then at the bag in his hand. And for a moment, something inside him hesitated. There was no punishment, no explicit consequence, but the weight of conscience. That was new. He climbed into the car with his friends. The driver, hired by his parents, started the engine, but no one spoke during the ride, because not all silences are empty. Jason Statham disappeared around the corner without looking back. But Liam knew that man didn't need to return, because the image of him standing silently beside the register would remain. Inside every glance, in every gesture, and the silence from that moment still echoed, louder than any word he had ever spoken. The next day, the store looked the same. Fully stocked shelves, clean aisles, hurried customers. But anyone paying close attention would notice that something subtle had changed. Conversations were quieter. Glances lingered longer. Checkout number 3, where Miriam worked, now carried a silent kind of respect, and though she arrived early as always, but there was something different in her walk. Her steps were lighter, even if tired. The previous night had been full of reflections, but also of a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The image of that man standing silently beside her had restored something that the hard days had almost erased, the certainty that she deserved respect. In the break room, the atmosphere was different. Whispered comments about the incident circulated. Some had seen it from a distance, others heard from customers, and a few had watched the video, the one that was never posted. Her co-workers spoke of Jason as if they had witnessed a legend, not because he was famous, but because he had done what many wouldn't, acted without seeking attention. As Miriam prepared for the day, something was growing inside her. It wasn't vanity nor a desire for revenge. It was just a quiet urge to keep going. As if the silence that had defended her was still present, like an invisible armor. Across town, Liam woke up in his spacious bed covered in expensive sheets. But what truly covered him that morning was a subtle discomfort. The laughter from the day before now echoed differently. The image of Jason standing beside him returned again and again, especially when he looked in the mirror. His father, as usual, had left early. His mother, buried in remote meetings and daily obligations, waved from the door in a rush. No one mentioned what had happened. Perhaps they didn't even know. But Liam, he remembered every detail. Back at the store, Jason wasn't immediately recognized. He arrived with the same calmness as the day before. Discreet clothes, dark sunglasses, a book under his arm, not a phone. His cart held only fruits and a small package of coffee. He didn't seek to be noticed, but it was impossible to ignore him. He moved slowly through the aisles, watching people, discreetly helping an elderly woman reach a high shelf, nodding back at a child who looked at him with quiet admiration. He said nothing, but everything Rouse said something. At the checkout, Miriam saw him approaching and hesitated for a moment. There was something sacred about that silent connection. When he stood in front of her, she smiled with serenity, and he returned it with a small nod. The exchange was simple, but loaded with meaning. She rang up the items with care. He placed a small bill beside the card machine without checking the amount. She gave back the exact change, as if they were following a silent choreography that only the two of them knew. Liam arrived at the store minutes later. He hadn't planned it. His feet had simply taken him there. He was wearing a cap again, but this time turned backward. He didn't walk the same way. He looked smaller inside his own clothes. He watched others, as if searching for something. And when his eyes landed on Jason standing in line, he stopped. He stayed near the entrance, pretending to look at a shelf of chocolates. But his eyes were locked on the man who had changed everything with a single gesture. Jason grabbed his bag and walked toward the exit. Liam thought about stepping out, maybe saying something, but he couldn't. Jason passed him without rushing. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. And in that instant, Liam felt something he had never experienced so intensely. Honor that belongs to someone else. The kind of feeling that doesn't impose itself, but forces others to look inward. Jason kept walking. Liam stood still, fingers gripping the hem of his shirt. A store employee walked past and nodded at him. He didn't respond. He was immersed in something deeper. It wasn't regret. It was awakening. For the first time, he noticed how Miriam treated every customer with patience, how she smiled even at the impatient ones, how she kept worn bills in a separate section of the drawer to make giving change easier, how she said, "Good afternoon," even when no one replied. Things that once went unnoticed now screamed. At the end of the aisle, Jason paused one last time. He picked up a flyer taped to the glass, a notice for a food donation drive for local families. He read it silently, folded it, and placed it in his pocket, and left. Liam stood staring at the automatic door. His friends weren't there. His phone was in his pocket, but it didn't matter. For the first time, he felt that no screen could translate what was happening inside him. Liam looked toward Miriam's checkout, then at the door still swaying with the wind left behind by Jason. He didn't know what he wanted to say, but he knew he needed to go back there. Not to be seen, but to see if there was still time to learn. It was Friday. The sun hid behind thick clouds, and the wind blew with a silence that seemed to speak to those willing to listen. Inside the market, the rhythm was different. Faster, more crowded, noisier. But even there, among overfilled bags, long lines, and overlapping voices, there was still room for gestures that didn't need sound. Miriam arrived as always. But that day, as she walked through the glass doors, she noticed something that hadn't been there before. Discreet smiles from customers, glances that didn't ignore her. Some nodded. Others simply gave her space. It wasn't fame. It was respect quietly earned. The echo of a scene no one dared to erase from memory. In the back office, the manager called her over kindly. They spoke quickly but honestly. Miriam confessed she had thought about quitting just days earlier, said she was tired, that she felt small, but something had changed, and the manager understood. It was visible. That woman was steadier now. Not because she had defended herself with shouting, but because she had been defended by someone who understood the value of silence. Meanwhile, Jason walked down a nearby street, wearing the same discreet style as always. Simple shirt, small backpack, slow, almost meditative steps. He carried a folded newspaper under one arm, an apple in the other hand. Nothing flashy. And yet, anyone who looked at him felt the opposite, as if he were carrying far more weight than his belongings suggested. He entered the market without haste, took a cart, didn't look around, but he observed everything. His eyes met those of an employee, and within seconds, the young man straightened up, as if something inside had reminded him of who he wanted to be, not out of fear, but out of admiration. Liam also entered the market, but he wasn't the same. Nothing about his posture remained. He walked alone, cap in his hands, plain t-shirt. The hands that once gripped a phone were now free and restless. Some people looked away when they saw him. Others just stared for a few seconds. A shadow still followed him, and he knew it. He walked to the canned goods aisle, just to look busy. Then he stopped in front of the juice fridge, unsure of what to choose. But it wasn't juice he was looking for. From afar, he saw Miriam at the register. She was speaking with a child who was buying candy with counted coins. Her smile was genuine, her patience intact. Liam watched as if seeing that for the first time. Then, Jason appeared. On the other side, picking up a basket of bread. His gaze moved through the space like someone reading a story. His eyes landed briefly on Liam, but didn't linger. It was as if saying, "Change doesn't need to be announced to be noticed." Liam froze for a second. It stung, but it didn't hurt. It was the kind of pain that doesn't tear, it transforms. He walked toward the exit, but before crossing the door, he stopped, looked back. Jason was already in line, with just a few items. The line moved slowly, but he didn't seem in a hurry. Miriam served him with the same kindness as always, the same as every day. And for Liam, that was the strongest part of all. Because Miriam didn't treat Jason any differently, she simply continued being who she had always been. And that proved something Liam was still trying to understand. The world doesn't need to change for you to learn. You're the one who needs to change to see the world clearly. When Jason grabbed his bag and walked toward the exit, he paused for a second by the store's bulletin board. A simple poster caught his eye. Food donation for families in need. Any contribution welcome. Without any fuss, he folded the flyer, placed it in his pocket, and moved on. Liam saw him leave. Liam saw, at the end of her shift, Miriam was called to the office once again. She didn't know why. But upon entering the room, she saw a brown envelope on the desk. Inside, there was an unsigned note. And along with it, a generous contribution to the food drive. The manager didn't know who had left it, but Miriam. She did. Liam was still outside when he saw Miriam exit, envelope in hand. She looked up at the sky, took a deep breath, and smiled. And in that smile, there was an answer no one had spoken out loud, but that he understood. Maybe there was still time to start again. It was Saturday morning. The sun poured through the store's windows more brightly, and the flow of customers picked up with urgency. Carts were full, children restless, couples arguing over prices. Routine carried on. But at checkout number 3, there was something more than routine. There was care. Miriam organized coupons methodically, cracked quiet jokes with longtime customers, and smiled as if everyone were an old friend. The envelope she had received the day before was still tucked inside her purse. She didn't know whether to say thank you, return it, or keep it forever as a symbol. But the gesture had left a deep mark. Not because of the amount, but because of the manner. Silent, firm, respectful. A gesture like that could only come from someone who understood the weight of dignity. Liam had woken up early that day. He sat on the edge of his bed, thoughts still tangled. What had happened at the store in the past few days wasn't something easily forgotten. It wasn't just about what he had done. It was about what he had ignored for so long. The expressions, the silences, the consequences. Jason's gaze. The mirror in his room no longer reflected the same boy. The mask of arrogance, posturing, false confidence, it had all cracked. And now Liam could see through the cracks. He decided to return to the store. Not to shop, not to show off. He didn't even know exactly why. He just felt like he had to. He put on a simple t-shirt, no logos, no cap, no phone in his hand. Just a small envelope in the back pocket of his jeans. When he arrived, he stood outside for a few minutes before going in. He observed the movement. Customers coming and going, employees laughing in the back. Miriam, visible through the glass, attending to someone with kindness. No spotlight, no camera, but every scene looked 1,000 times more real than any story he had ever posted. Liam walked in, slowly made his way to a shelf and pretended to look for something. He passed the cleaning supplies, then the pasta aisle. Finally, he approached the line at Miriam's register, but didn't get in it. He just watched. In line, an older customer dropped a coin. Miriam bent down to pick it up with the same eagerness of someone who respects every person. The customer smiled, and she returned it with a warm nod. Nothing seemed extraordinary in that moment, except to Liam. Jason wasn't at the store that day, but his absence said just as much as his presence. It was as if his figure lingered in people's behavior, as if he had left echoes in their gestures. Liam walked toward the register. He waited in line. When it was his turn, Miriam recognized him. For a second, her eyes hesitated. But there was no fear, no resentment. Just doubt and openness. He placed a few small items on the counter, a pack of cookies, an apple, a juice, nothing more. He said nothing, and neither did she. She simply rang up the items like she would for any customer. But their eyes said everything. His too. When she finished, he handed her a bill. She gave back the change. Then discreetly he placed the envelope on the counter and gently slid it toward her. Miriam looked at the envelope, then at him. But Liam didn't hold the gaze. He just gave a slight nod and walked away. She waited for him to leave, then opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded handwritten note. Not a long message, just a few simple sentences, shaky but full of truth. An apology, an acknowledgement, and the last line, nearly illegible. Now I understand what that man was trying to show. I hope you felt it too. Miriam folded the note, placed it in the same purse where the previous envelope still rested. She took a deep breath. Her eyes shimmered, but not with sorrow, with understanding. Liam left the store with firm steps, not out of pride, but because of politeness. Something had been pulled out from inside, and at the same time, rebuilt. There was still much to learn, but for the first time, he wanted to learn. Hours later, Jason returned to the store, discreet as always. Miriam served him again, and at the end, as she handed him the bag, she said only with her eyes, "He came back." Jason understood. He didn't ask anything. He simply touched the counter lightly with his fingers and left, in silence. Liam crossed the street without looking back. For the first time, the world didn't feel like a stage, and he didn't need an audience, because some of the greatest transformations happen without witnesses, and this one had begun inside him. The following week arrived with gray skies and cold wind. The store was bustling as usual, but for those with a sharper eye, there was something more in the air, a kind of silence between actions, as if everyone knew something had happened, but no one dared to put it into words. At checkout number 3, Miriam began her shift with the same gestures as always, organizing the bills carefully, wiping down the card machine screen, straightening her name tag. But inside her, something had changed. Not just because of the envelope she still kept in her purse, but because somehow she knew the world had given back something that time had almost taken. The certainty that her presence mattered. Jason still showed up from time to time, always discreet, never on a predictable schedule, as if he chose the moments at random. But to Miriam, he appeared exactly when he was needed most, even without saying a single word. Liam had returned to the store a few times, never during peak hours, always alone, always walking more calmly. The staff began to see him differently, not for who he had been before, but for what he had let go of. He no longer cared about being noticed, and that made him more visible. On a warm late afternoon, Liam showed up again, wearing simple clothes, cap tucked into his pocket. He walked up to Miriam's register, carrying no products, just a white envelope in his hands, larger, with something inside. Miriam recognized him from afar, but she didn't react. He reached the counter, looked for a few seconds, and extended the envelope without ceremony. Miriam took it, waited for him to leave. Only then did she open it. Inside was a small donation in cash, modest, and with it a folded sheet of paper. On the back, a hand-drawn sketch, the checkout counter, a smiling female figure, and beside her, the figure of a man standing, holding a grocery bag. Jason. No face, just the silhouette. The caption, written in firm but youthful handwriting. Because sometimes, teaching isn't about speaking. It's about showing how it's done. Miriam held the paper for a few seconds, folded it slowly. Her eyes were glassy, but her smile was full. This wasn't about forgiveness. It was about rebuilding. Liam left the store. He didn't look back. Jason wasn't there that day, but his absence was part of the lesson. In the days that followed, things began to shift. Small attitudes, more patient customers, teenagers helping elderly people carry bags, employees paying more attention to one another. Not because of rules, but because of example. The video Liam's friends had filmed was never posted, but a different recording made by an anonymous customer standing at the back of the line that first day was quietly published. No clickbait title, no exaggerated captions, just the scene of a man witnessing injustice and changing everything without raising his voice. The video went viral, but not because Jason was famous, it was because of what he represented. The internet didn't care who he was, it cared about what he did. At the store, customers began arriving with donations. The campaign surpassed all expectations. Miriam was quietly honored by her coworkers. The manager made a few small improvements to the work environment. Nothing grand, but real. One afternoon, Jason returned. Miriam smiled when she saw him. There was no longer the weight of the past. Now, there was silent understanding. She rang up his items with the same gentle care as always. He waited patiently. When she finished, she handed him the bag with a calm smile. He held it for a moment, and in that brief touch, something was exchanged. Something that 1,000 words couldn't explain. Then Jason did something unexpected. He looked around, then back at her and extended a small white card. On it was a simple handwritten message. Consider collaborating with me on future efforts. I believe there's something powerful in combining theory with the clarity you offer every day. Miriam read it, smiled, and nodded. Jason said nothing, but for a second his expression softened, as if to say, "Now I can go." Liam passed by on the sidewalk at that exact moment. He saw Jason leaving. He didn't try to approach, he just smiled. There was nothing more to say, because some transformations are silent but final. A young employee new at the store once asked Miriam why she always sat on the same bench during her break. Miriam smiled and looked toward the back of the store. "Because from here, I can see who needs help first." And in that simple gesture, she made something clear. The real privilege isn't in knowing more, but it's in using what you know to help everyone rise together. If this story touched you in any way, if you believe that respect can still change the world, like the video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to the channel. Here, each story has a truth that the world needs to hear.